So basically, there's a lot of there's an inlet or an exit hole in the hood where air is coming into the radiator and exiting out of the radiator over the top of the hood, and it's hot air, right, coming because the radiator's hot. And that air would go around the car into the NACAs if you're trying to open a NACA for a driver or whatever, right? All the hot air is trying to come in that way. So anytime we traditionally try to cool the driver, we're just pumping more hot air into the car. Right. So you put a window inlet right at the center, and that's sort of the new direction, right? The new thought process.
That and there's some, depending upon where it settles out, there's a couple other things. There's actually some slots and holes in the rear window.
Right, so there's a place for air to get in the front and then air to exit in the back. And that's
actually it's coming in the back too.
Really?
Yeah. Coming in the rear window, yeah, because it's,
where does the air exit?
Well, I think once you get enough air in there, it's still going to come out the A-post, and the driver's side's really the only place it can come out if you got the right pressures going in there. But that's what's happening. You're actually getting more cool air in there to pressurize it more, and it's coming out the driver window.
So the inlet on the windshield, is that how much more development will be going on with that?
I think what was done before was 2 NACA ducts just kind of put up in there just to put some holes in there and let's see if that works at the Roval. And I think now it's more, match that effectiveness, but leave the room for the styling, and let's go through, make sure it's still effective in the kind of configuration it's at. So I think it's probably at this point in time, knowing it's going to be there is probably done. I think how you do it to get the rest of the graphics and stuff to look right where it's at.
Interesting.
It's going to be interesting what happens when it rains.
I hadn't heard that there had been I hadn't heard that this has actually been on the racetrack, or the drivers actually got to really experience this in a good environment. So I guess that's a good step.
Yeah, at Daytona, the first day, all the drivers met with NASCAR, and it was a good meeting, and we complained. Our 2 biggest complaints were the steering and the heat. We couldn't run 20 laps without all of us felt like we're burning up.
Wow.
I
think temperature inside the car, I've been hearing like 150, right?
Yeah,
something like
that left side exhaust that runs right under your tail, like you shoot it with a gun at Daytona, and it was like Stenhouse was 170 at one point right there. I mean, it was ridiculously hot. So we started, a lot of us, we just started asking NASCAR, hey, can we go to town on this second half of the day and try and get some temp out? Yeah. And everybody just started opening up things, cutting holes, trying to figure out how to get air out. And there were some great ideas at that test, and some things worked, and we had temperature sensors, and we started dropping temp out, and then they went to the Roval with like a list, a whole plan of things to do, and then everybody started doing one at a time and taking a lot of temperature out.
That's good.
It's been a great collaboration, the whole project really with NASCAR and the OEMs and the teams. They jumped on that and really all worked really close together, and I think, it's been every issue that we've seen, it's been a collaborative group put together, across all the different stakeholders, and I think we made a big dent on that. And I think, the current car, I think a lot of people, current car runs pretty hot.
It does.
If you look at the floor, it's just, everybody's developed ways to seal it off or move the seat up and have different floor things, and we'll get to that. But it was a little excessive, I think, and I think the reaction was good by NASCAR, and NASCAR has improved a lot technically, right? They used to totally rely on the teams, and now with the different personnel they have and the ability to react, they did a bunch of CFD and aero work to figure out how to affect the cooling, whereas before they would just wait for an OEM or a team to do it. So they've responded really well, and I think we're going to keep developing it. There's going to things show up as in competition, but I think the collaboration between all the stakeholders is really what separates this car. It's been being worked on for a long time.
I'm gonna when they crashed the car, there was some concern with the drivers about the car not having enough crush zones or not absorbing enough of the impact, and the impacts being too hard on the physical, the driver themselves. And so, is it right to say that NASCAR's went through their testing and found ways to create the crush zones and create the the deflection in the clips to accept some more of the impact?
I think a lot of things in the sport, the rumors are end up being different than the reality, right? And
are you saying drivers are whiny?
Well, I think rumors cycle through the garage. I kept having people would call me and say, "Oh, I heard the crash dummy didn't make it at the crash test." Like they ain't even tested yet, right? I mean,
Was that true? Because that was a rumor that was
No,
going on everywhere.
no, it was
Yeah,
not
what
true.
was the reality? So there was no crash test dummy?
No, it was.
It
but
was,
at
but
the
it didn't
time,
go
the
th-
rumors were going around the garage. They hadn't even done the test yet. So that's how I knew it was false.
Yeah.
Right? And,
Gotcha.
But
Okay.
and so I think, honestly, NASCAR, to their credit, with the panel experts they have, they've sat with the stakeholders, the drivers, and everybody, really went through the real data to show current car comparison. And honestly, the changes that they're making, the thought was, okay, they had to make those. It actually is not true. It actually is, hey, we saw something. We think we can even improve it even more.
Right.
But I think compared to the current vehicle, there's so many parts of the vehicle that are they've improved safety wise and things learned over the years. And I think this last step was, hey, we can do some small things with forcing a clip to bend right at this point and all these different things, and been successful in a few of those minor changes that I think will be helpful.
I know we haven't been able to put the car in a situation to really understand this for sure, but when we watch races this year, at least, I was really frustrated with the inability for the drivers, the Cup side, to make contact. They have to literally stay away from each other because of the potential of a flat tire. And as the cars have gotten lower and things have changed, it's gotten even worse. This year was probably the worst we've seen in a while, where the Xfinity cars, now they're going to have a flat tire if they're too egregious, but they can hit the wall. They can do all kinds of things with their cars and continue on. And the idea or the hope is that this car will be similar to what we see in the Xfinity Series. Can you think we can count on that?
I mean, I think that, one, the engineering of the body panels and the quality of the body panels, but from a cost perspective, the Cup car, after doing the Xfinity car and that kind of flange fit composite body and learning what we've learned as an industry, really going into this car with that mindset, I think you're going to see a lot of things even better with this car. I think the one thing we'll have to learn a little bit is the transaxle and how does the rear impact, what kind of durability is there. It's a pretty solid piece back there. So, I mean, I feel like it's actually going to be better than what we've seen with the rear housing and issues with that. But I think it's going to be much closer than Xfinity. I don't want to say better, but I feel like compared to today, just like you said, I mean, it's not just even the cutting the tires, but just the cars are so dependent upon all these aero, down to the last 10 thousandths, and that's what's causing having
You
to
can't touch anybody.
repair the car, and all of a sudden, even one little barely touch it and it don't handle anymore. So I think that's going to be a lot better.
Yeah. So from a driver standpoint, do you have that same feeling? Because you've raced in the Xfinity Series and you kind of understand that those guys can get away with beating on each other, leaning on each other. As a viewer and a broadcaster, you love that. You love seeing those guys lean on each other and push each other up the racetrack and run each other all out of the groove and so forth. But in the Cup Series, you couldn't even take the risk.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you'll have a little more freedom there?
I mean, even at Phoenix, when you go across the flat and you kill your side skirts, I mean, you're starting to think about downforce loss. So, I mean, I was down there crushing right off the bat. I'm like, man, am I slowing my car down doing this? But, I mean, it's a place to go, so you use it. But, I think it's cool. I mean, those Xfinity guys get a lot of good racing because they can be aggressive. And, hell, you see a guy knock the fence down 3 or 4 times and keep on trucking, sometimes almost look like they get faster. Yeah. I mean, Reddick did it a lot for us. We were like, hey, man, when you get in these steel body cars, it's a little different. And he's done a good job of kind of doing that. But that's a guy, you see different things from the Xfinity Series that we really can't approach the race that way. We've got to keep it clean, and that's how you win the race, is having a clean car by the end of it and getting that chance to be up front.
So the new car, Next Gen, has a diffuser on the back. How much does the diffuser how much is that affecting the downforce, or what is that? How much of a percentage, if you could give me a percentage, is the driver getting from that?
I think the underbody of the car is a large percentage of the downforce. If you look at just from, I'm an aerodynamicist, so I try to not get too geeky here, but
he's also from Mount Airy. So.
Yeah. So if you take the top surface of the car, the top surface always lifts. It actually doesn't create downforce, so it all comes from the bottom. It's the delta between the top and the bottom, but if you look at the diffuser in the back, I mean, I would say more than half of the downforce on the bottom is coming from the diffuser, because it actually drives this low pressure even forward. So it's not as much the diffuser itself. The air is kind of expanding out of the diffuser, but what that does is it kind of creates low pressure on the floor ahead of it, and that's really where it's coming from. And it's going to be interesting because it's definitely going to be different, Yeah. And I think the wake of the car and kind of going back to how we got here, I think, as everyone knows, we've done so many air packages and gone to the test so many times. And how do you mess with this bubble, or how do you change this speed? And you just got to a point where it's like, with the solid axle, you just can't do anything with the bottom of the car. You can't really clean up the wake, and so this car is definitely approached by that approach. How it actually works, there's not been a lot of traffic running. I think it's going to be different. What I would have wished for was that you could make it where the diffuser stalls at some point, where you have to make this trade-off, like how close do you want to get to the edge. We didn't quite get to that, to where it's still gaining as you travel, but as you get in traffic, I think people are going to have to make choices of what pitch they run, because
Okay, so the diffuser's got some adjustment.
yeah, I think the attitude of the car is really sensitive, right? And the diffuser does have adjustment. If they give it to us or not, we'll see.
Yeah.
So
you can change the platform of the car, and that affects it.
Big difference.
Let me ask you this. I'm going to put you in an uncomfortable situation. If you can run into the back of a guy's car and damage his diffuser, are you going to do it?
I guess if he pisses me off, right?
Well, no.
Depends on who it is, right?
If you know that you're not
to
about
win?
40, no.
Oh, just in general.
Middle of the race, hey, I'm going to take 40% of your downforce away. Watch this.
Yeah, I mean, if it's an option, we're going to take advantage
how
of
would
it.
that?
What you got to be careful about, and does
it punch a hole?
I think
in the
about that.
nose?
I'm like,
I think think about that. Like, how are they
you
not
could
going
actually
to
hit
destroy
it.
each other's
You could
diffusers?
actually hit it and raise it up in the back and help
Make
him
it better.
right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we'll have to learn that. I'm sure there's going to be things like that. But with the underwing and everything,
the rub blocks at Daytona were a thing.
The what?
I mean? The rub blocks, underneath the car. Yeah. That stops the travel, right?
Yeah.
So like, somebody has a flat and is able to get back to pit road, and you go through your rub block, right? You can run the car lower.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I was curious about. I wasn't even going to ask about that, but me and Latar just had a little discussion about that.
But
so,
they've made a rule.
It's a hot topic of debate right now.
So
I have a personal opinion on it myself.
For over a couple decades, they've used pucks under the cars out of different materials to limit travel or stop you from grinding through your splitter whenever you didn't want to do that. But now this new next gen car has rub blocks, basically made out of what material?
Well, actually, they're aluminum now.
They're aluminum.
We went through some different materials early on. The very first test, NASCAR spent a lot of time trying to look at all these materials, and we actually found a material, I think it's called Vespar, that was like, you couldn't wear it off. It was like the most frictionless surface, but the actual cost of one puck was like 3 times the weight of gold, and so
Jesus.
eventually you're like, all right.
Yeah, well, you get what you pay for.
Right, so we cycled through a little bit of that, and I think.
Now let me tee it up by saying to the people listening that your car will run faster if it gets lower, if you can run your car lower. But these are blocks put on the car by NASCAR to limit the travel of the car and stop you from getting to a certain point, or so that everybody has to kind of play in the same box. Now, if they're made of aluminum, I can send, or you can send Austin out on the racetrack and say, hey, man, this thing's going to drag the racetrack terribly for about 50 laps. But the last 100 laps of this race, we're going to be a half a second faster than everybody else. And so go drag this thing off, and then we'll be good.
You see the sparks flying at Daytona at the beginning of the race? That's the same thing with the track bar.
So
how is NASCAR going to
So basically, 2 things. So that's true. So you could go at a couple approaches, and there's different lobbying efforts going on from the teams of which way to go. But you could enforce a minimum block height after the race, right? Like other series, you take F1, you hit the plank. It's got to be, if it's less than a certain thickness, you're out. So instead of having to really go through that, because the spring and the way the suspension works, they're discussing, and will likely be some setting where the damper can't be compressed anymore. So basically, depending upon how that's set, you couldn't hit the rub blocks unless you had a flat tire or something that.
Okay.
It'll be some combination of that, to where they're not just going to let you go out there and do exactly it.
And we do have a rule now, right?
Tears the racetrack up, first of all.
Sure.
But there'll be a combination of where you really can't hit the rub block unless you have a flat, and it creates there's a lot of debate on how that affects the suspension settings. A lot of things that are still kind of. This is one of those things now where you get to tech procedure and all these things that still a lot of dialogue on what's efficient or what does it hurt. But I think that part of it, that you won't be just rubbing the rub block off.
Well, you're saying there's debate with the effect or the cause. I mean, like there's debates, because it seems like that there's this is something you guys have been mulling over a lot, right?
Well, what happens in these meetings between the teams, and I'm putting my team hat on, not my OEM hat on now.
Okay.
You're lobbying NASCAR to do for a rule one, to try to save yourself, but you think you got some idea, you're trying to manipulate the rule to help you, and you never quite know in the room whether NASCAR or the team, why are they arguing for this? But in this particular case, I just think, setting that shock link or damper link to keep it off the rub blocks, everybody kind of understands that, and I think it's what are the knock-on effects of that, and that guys really hadn't spent a ton of time until they've got their cars and go testing, kind of to the point earlier about not finding the edge. When we've done all these tests, it's just like a tire test. You run these pressures and these settings, and so people hadn't really got on the edge of performance trying to run the lower pressures and the settings of the tires. And so I think understanding, all right, what suspension do I want to run, and what effect does that rule have, I think is where the discussion point is.
So with the new sequential box, you won't have an H pattern anymore. You'll be forward and back on your shifting.
So bump it once to reverse, and you'll watch that right there. Go to that's -1. Yeah, reverse. Forward is reverse. Yep. And then back one is neutral. Bump it one time, and then it's hard. So it's hard. Yeah, it's like hit it one time. Okay. Right. Ready? Yeah.
What was that like, I guess, in your first experience? I know you've probably driven several cars that have done that, like the road cars, Imps, and so forth. So, how comfortable were you with that through your testing?
I felt pretty good about it. Legends cars, I think similar, just pull back and go forward, same thing. And I thought that the mechanical side of it, like the part, was really nice. I mean, it shows up on the dash what gear you're in, and some of the things technically I think are really nice about it. Remind me of a dirt bike going through the gears. Like when you go through, it's like bang, bang, bang. I mean, it's fast. And
it can be quick.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think.
Do you use a clutch at all?
I wasn't. No,
Yeah.
I wasn't touching the clutch. Now, I think one thing we're trying to figure out best now is like pit road. So, my procedure on pit road, I'll either run first or second gear for my RPM, and I throw it in neutral when I'm 2-3 boxes away, try and get the wheels locked up, hit my sign.
Yeah, now how do you get to neutral?
Right.
From
second. Yeah.
Without going to first.
So for me, I'm trying to lobby for, first gear pit road speeds, so I can just bump it in neutral still like I used to. Tyler's been messing with just pushing the clutch in and keeping it in gear, and you can do it either way. I just feel like I like having, I don't know, for something about neutral just feels right
does
to
it
me.
different.
Yeah, and so we'll be messing with our gear ratios, trying to find out, if first gear is our pit road speed, that's fine. You'll be in second everywhere else when you're out there.
How come they didn't go to paddles on the steering wheel, and when they're probably going to end up doing that inside the next 5 years? Why didn't they just start there?
I think it's like what level of electronics do you put on the diff, right? I mean, that's really where, and the engine controls as well. You need a different ECU for that. It exists, but it's trying to keep the cost. There was a push from the owners to say, okay, this car has to cost less than this, or it doesn't make sense. And I think trying to make those decisions of where do you put it, that was one that there was a lot of discussion early, and how do you do that and make sense. It'll be something easy to implement in the future, but from a cost point of view, it didn't really add value to it versus getting through the transition.
Actually, there was a fan question that actually had pertained to this. I was going to ask it right here. With this may be for you, Austin. I mean, with the 5-speed transmission, do you think we will see more shifting on the oval tracks, particularly the 1.5-mile tracks?
That is something we've been talking about testing. Like, so are we going to be using fifth? I mean, even at Daytona, we messed with trying to run fourth one time all the way around the track, and it didn't really pick it up. Fifth was the desired place. So, and I think it's not going to be like now where you have a couple little choices with your gear ratios that you can select. Supposedly it's going to be way more locked in. So I don't know where NASCAR personally wants to have you at gear-wise, or where they want for track. But, I mean, I'm sure it'll come down to your engine manufacturers, what RPMs they want to see. And then, I don't know, you could be shifting. I mean, it's definitely a possibility. It's a lot easier.
So could you see a scenario? That's a great question. Could you see a scenario where, when we went to Bowman Gray, we ran second gear? Was that only because we just didn't want to put a different gear in the car?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I'm sure at that point in time,
But my question, I guess it was like, that was really easy, right?
Yeah.
Could you see a scenario where they, you tell a driver, hey man, at Bristol this weekend, we're going to be in third gear. Next weekend at Richmond, we're going to be in fourth gear. When we go to Darlington, I want you to run fifth gear. Are you going to see that happen, or are you going, is NASCAR, is the development team going to try to have the drivers close to running fourth gear pretty much everywhere and having fifth as that option? Or
I think it depends on the way the transaxle, and that there's 3 transaxles. They call them box A, box B, box C for the type classes of tracks. Let's call it speedways, and then the short tracks, and trying to get all of the ratios that we run today, and with the RPM that we're looking for. But there are drop gears that can go in the back that can move around a little bit, and I think it really just comes down to where does it end up with the gaps and what the gears are, and can you run it. Like now the rules set up where like 138 is third gear, and you can't shift and cut most of the places because it just overruns the RPM. We don't know quite yet whether that's going to be true, and I think there's a big, more than anything, trying to figure out, do we need 3 boxes or 2? Like if the speedways based on the power level and the speed, that's the one that almost makes you have to have a third box. If you can get that down to 2, so there's probably bigger things going on right now, but that'll obviously become a huge question. If the durability's there, maybe it's a good thing, right? Maybe you don't do it now because you get the development of the transmissions and all the things, but it's a fixed box, it's sealed, all the rules are in place. They may open it up.
How does the driver save fuel with this car? The same way? I mean, is it like, hey man, I want you to run 80% throttle? All the things that they developed over the last decade with pickups and switches and all the things, go to 2 on your box, all that stuff's gone away.
No, I think a lot of that still be there. I think the ECU and the system of fuel pumps and all those things all the same. Now, the fuel cell itself, maybe not quite as much freedom as far as having those little reserve boxes and things. It may becomes more standardized from that standpoint, but I think in general the techniques and the different things of cutting the hybrid hems are still going to be there.
That was another thing that I noticed about the car when I drove it the other day, was the throw and the gas pedal was really short. It felt like, so we when I went out there to onto the track, I'm going around and I'm like, this is Bowman Gray, these tiny little straightaways.
Yeah.
And I'm running and I'm not full throttle, and I'm not sure how, if this thing's going to try to dragster down the straightaway or what it's going to do. And I felt like in my mind I was like, man, I'm probably only 25% throttle here. I've got a lot of throttle left to go. I'm gonna try to match. And I went to mat it, and it was only like another 1/8 of an inch before it got to the stop. And so all of these things I know drivers will adapt to, right? You'll get used to everything that's different about the car. So and
it's floor mounted pedals. That's different.
I've never drove a car that I know of with floor mounted pedals. How much adjustability is there in things like that? Can you, if I said, man, I need another 1/2 inch in the throttle throw itself, could you give that to me?
I still think you can, because it's not drive-by-wire throttle, so it still has the same mechanical linkage to the throttle body. I didn't want to say carburetor or fuel injection. And so I still think that adjustment's going to be there. Maybe it's not quite as much range because your pedal ratio.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any reason why you can't have something.
Yeah, that was weird.
NASCAR pretty much said the inside there you can make slight adjustments and stuff to your, like I don't really care for the gas pedal, like the beveled holes in it and stuff. So I'm gonna make a little bit different. Might make me a footprint gas pedal. I don't know.
Right. So you'll be able to do that.
Yeah, you'll be able to mess with some of that
some of the
stuff.
Parts, some of these parts, they're going to be like, nope, that's something you bought and you got to run that, right? And so how is the freedom right now with being able to, customize even just the driver stuff?
There's a list of kind of, okay, these are parts that are
hands off,
right?
Yep.
And then there's quite things around the.
It's a tighter box. I'll say that for sure.
Things around the driver, your switch packages, a lot of those things.
Shifter.
Internal parts of the car. Team provided, you call them.
A lot of teams where they're getting really nice and fun and creative with dashes and switch panels and things like that. You're still going to have the ability to sort of cut, give your car an identity as far as the organizations, because Gibbs would have their dashes different. They were you'd see everybody and go, damn, that's cool how they did that.
Yeah. I think there's still going to be differences there. They're not really, putting a set specification out on that. The dash going to be a little bit different based on the extra bar in there and where the dash is, but I still think there's different switch configurations and things. There's going to be some deviation between them.
Did you enjoy that conversation with Eric Warren and Austin Dillon? Well, listen to the entire interview. The Dale Jr. Download is available on all podcast platforms. All right, guys, I know a little bit about cars, so believe me when I tell you that Tire Pros, they're the real deal. They've got great people, great service, and they can take care of all your automotive maintenance needs. Plus, they're a sponsor of this show, so you know they got great taste in podcasts. So check out Tire Pros. Follow them on Facebook and tell them that I sent you.